Okay, next concept is sling model. So we already discussed a couple of times about these content nodes and components. Content nodes would be available at page level. Article-details is a content node. And it will be useful to store the content in the form of the key value pairs. The purpose of the content node is to store the content in key value pairs. And the second purpose is it will be useful to connect with the component with the help of sling resource type property. With the help of sling resource type property. So this content node will generate automatically whenever you drag and drop a component in a particular page. For example, here Jailer movie trailer is a page. It will be available under content, news portal, USEN articles, and then Jailer movie trailer. So if you open this page in browser in edit mode and drag and drop article detail component, this content node will automatically generate. And even this sling resource type property also will add automatically based on the component, drag and drop. So this property also will generate. The value of the sling resource type property is component path, the relative path of the component. News portal, components, articles, and article details. In the runtime, when you try to access this page, all these content nodes will execute one by one. While executing this content node, while executing this article detail content node, in the memory, Apache Sling generates one object called properties. Properties is an object. It will generate in the memory and add all the properties of this content node into the object. Add all the properties of this content node into the object. Example, article title and article description and article image. All these properties will add into the properties object. So this is the properties object in memory. And this object will pass to the component. In the component, we have article detail.html. While executing this component, we can utilize this object. This is one object in memory. In this object, we have all the properties of this content node. So by using this properties object and then property name, we can read all the properties. Article title, article image, article description, all the properties we can read and inject the data into the HTML markup. Here, properties is one of the predefined object in name. Class name is value map. Object name is properties. So this properties object will generate at the time of processing this content node. It's Apache Sling responsibility to create this properties object and add all the properties of this content node into the properties object. And then we can use the property object into .html file to read the content node data. So this is a high level execution flow of a component. But sometimes we have to customize this object. Example, I have article expiry. I have one requirement. If article is already expired, I should not render this title, description, image. If already expired, I should not render this title and description and image. So rather than displaying these three fields, I have to display this article is expired, or I have to navigate to home page. So this is the business requirement. So this requirement we can't fulfill by using this properties object, because this properties object contain the data only. So we don't have the process data. Let's say article expiry is one of the property in the content node. It will simply return the article expiry date. Either by using HTL or by using properties object, we can't implement custom logic. So in this process, we have to compare article expiry date with the current date. If article expiry is less than current date, so that means the article is expired. If the article is expired, we should not render title and description and image. So this business logic we can't implement with HTL and this default properties global object. So we have to create our own custom object by using Sling models. By using Sling models. So here Sling model also on Java class. Sling model also on Java class. This Sling model we can implement by using @model annotation. @model is one of the Sling annotation. Sling annotation, it will be useful to register a class as a Sling model. @model is the one of the Sling annotation. It will be useful to register one class as a Sling model. And then adaptable is one of the attribute. Adaptable is one of the attribute inside @model equal resource.class. Resource.class. So this is one of the mandatory attribute. So without this attribute, we can't deploy the Sling models into AEM server. Adaptable is a mandatory attribute in @model. The acceptable values are resource.class, Sling HTTP servlet request.class, and resource resolver class. So these are the three acceptable values of adaptables. So we'll discuss later about when we use resource and when we use Sling HTTP servlet request. So this so that is one of the important interview question. So we'll discuss later. But this is one Java class. From this Java class, we have to create object. From this Java class, we have to create object. So this object creation, we have to do it in .html file by using data-sl-use. Data-sl-use dot article model equal article model Java class path. Article model Java class path. If it is properties object, we don't need to create object because properties is a global object. Properties is a predefined object. It would be available to all .html files. So we don't need to create object for value map and object name is properties. Properties object is already created before executing our component. So that's why we are able to access directly properties.article title. But if you create your own Java class, and if you want to read the data, and if you want to process the data before using your component, we have to create object by using data-sl-use. This is one of the important block statement. It will be useful to create object for Java classes. Not only for Java classes, we can create object for HTML files and JS files and content node and Java files. Once object is created, it is similar to properties object. Properties is one of the predefined object, but here article model is custom object. From the custom object, we can read all the instance variable of this class. This is one Java class. In this Java class, we have multiple instance variable, example, article title and article description. All these properties we can read one by one by using article model object. This is one object. It is representing article detail model. From this object, we can read article title and article image and article description. This is one custom object. Custom object we are creating to read the data and to process the data before using in your component. Before using in your component. This is a simple Sling model. @model is annotation. Adaptable is a mandatory attribute. Acceptable values are resource.class or Sling HTTP servlet request.class, or we can use both at a time. So one common mistake from the beginners while importing the resource.class, check this package. Check the package. The resource class should be org.apache.sling.apa.resource.resource because multiple resource classes are available in different packages. If you import or if you use a wrong import, it won't register as a Sling model. Even it will be very difficult to identify the root cause. Check this import statement whenever you're writing Sling model. So this is the right import. org.apache.sling.apa.resource.resource is the right import for the resource.class. So this is one of the beginner's mistake. Okay. So once you create Sling model, so we have to read the data from the content node. We have to read the data from the content node. So here, this is the content node. The request will forward from content node to component. In the component, we are creating object for the Sling model. While creating this object, these annotations will execute. At the rate value is one of the annotation. This annotation will execute. This annotation will be useful to read the data from the content node. So this is the content node. And this content node is having multiple properties: article title, article description, and article image. These properties we can read in our custom Java class by using @valuemap_value. @valuemap_value is one of the Sling annotation. It will be useful to read the data from the content node. So if it is out-of-box object, properties is one of the out-of-box object. So in that object, we don't need to read the data and assign to Java variables, because that is the default implementation. Properties is one of the value map object. Object will be created at the time of processing that content node, and adding all the properties is Apache Sling responsibility. If you are writing any custom Java class to read the properties, we have to use @valuemap_value annotation. Check this statement. Here, Java variable name should match with your content node property name. So here, content node property is article title. Same name we have to use in our Java classes as well. Same name. And article description. Article description also one of the property in the content node. So content node property should match with your Java class variables. Match with Java class variables. If the matching is missing, it can't read the data from the content node. For example, article title. So here in this statement, let's say instead of giving capital T, we give small t. It can't identify this property in the content node. In that case, it will return null value. So that's why we have to map the content node property with Java class variables. So there is multiple annotations are available to read the data from the different sources. One of the sources content node. From the content node, if you want to read any data, use @valuemap_value. And then private string property name. This is one of the content node property name. And every instance variable must have the getter method in the Sling model. Every instance variable must have the getter method in the Sling model. So this is mandatory implementation. Because when you try to access article title in your HTML code base, internal it will call the getter method. If the getter method is not available, then you can't access this article title. For every instance variable, you must have the getter method in order to access in your HTML code base. So don't forget to create the getter method if you want to read these variables inside the HTML code. So let me implement a simple Sling model. src main model is a separate package available. So please create all your Sling models inside the models only. Don't create outside of the model. Right click, create Java class, article details model. So this is one of the standard. Article detail is a component name, and then append the model. And this is not mandatory, but if you create in this way, by seeing this class name, you can easily understand this is the Sling model. Just for readability purpose, follow the standard. Whenever you create a Sling model, append model by end of the name. Create a Java class. And then convert this normal Java class into Sling model by using @model annotation. Check this model class. So it is part of the Apache Sling, org.apache.sling.models.annotation. Then immediately it return error. See, it is returning error. There is one error in this class. There is an error in this class. Adaptable missing through the required. Because adaptable is one of the mandatory attribute in @model annotation. Use adaptable and a resource. A resource is the class. See, this class is available in different packages. Different packages. But import org.apache.sling.api resource. Don't use other imports. Use org.apache.sling.api.resource dot class. Yes. Now this class is registered as a Sling model. Sling model. Inside this class, read property from the content node. @valuemap value, private, string, article title. @valuemap value, private, string, article description. @valuemap value, private, string, article image. So these are the three different properties are available in my content node. In my content node, these properties are available: article title and article description and article image. So we are reading that data by using @valuemap value annotation. By using @valuemap value annotation. And this instance variable must have the getter methods. Must have the getter methods. Right click, generate getters. Yes, getter methods are generated. Save the changes. So this is a simple Sling model. This is a simple Sling model. It will be useful to read article title, article description, and article image. Article image. So we are reading the data from the content node and assigning to instance variable. And then we have to create object for the Sling model by using data-use. But in this case, this model is not required. Because here we are simply reading the data from the content node. So instead of using this article detail model, we can use properties global object. Because there is no logic here. We are simply reading the data. If it is simply reading the data, we can use properties global object. Instead of creating your own object, we can simply create properties object. But the purpose of this class is to implement some logic. For example, I have one more property called article expiry. Article expiry is a property. Article expiry is a property. Save the changes. Article expiry is a property. So this is the date property. Sorry, I have selected string. Article expiry is the date property. Save the changes. Save the changes. Now I have to write the logic to check whether the article is expired or not by comparing with article expiry. By comparing with article expiry, this entire logic will write inside the post construct method. Post construct is one of the method. Post construct is one of the method. This method will execute after injecting data into the variables. So this is one of the entire question. What is the use of this post constructor? Check the name. Check the name. The name itself indicates post constructor. This method will execute after injecting data into these variables. @valuemap value, article title, article description, article image, and article expiry. After injecting data into the variables, the post construct method will execute. Post construct method will execute. So here I will write the logic if article expiry not equal to null, means if article expiry is configured through the dialog, not equal to null. I'll create a data object for today date. I'll create date object for today's date. Now I have to compare article expiry with today's date. Let's say I have configured article expiry is 4th May. Now today is 9th May. Today's date means we'll always give the today's date. Today is 9th May. Let's say article expiry is a property. It is stored in the content node. The value is 4th May. I have to compare this article expiry with today's date. So there is an existing method called compare to. Compare to. If article expiry compare to today less than 0 means article expiry is less than today's date, or less than equal. No, let's keep it less than only, less than equal. If article expiry is less than today's date, means article is expired. So we have to maintain this status by using one more variable. Create one more variable, private boolean is article or article is expired. Default value I'm using false. Default value is false. This is one instance variable. Article is expired false. Type is boolean. If this condition is satisfied, we have to update that property value is true. So this should update to true because article is less than today's date. So this logic we can't implement with HTL and properties global object. In this case, you have to write your own Sling model. You have to write your own Sling model because this business logic we can write inside the HTL code directly by using properties object. So we are processing article expiry date and comparing with today's date. If today's date is greater than article expiry, then we are updating article is expired. Now I'll use this property in our HTML code. If article expiry is equal to true, I should not render article title, article description, and article image. So this logic we can write only by using our custom objects. And don't forget to create getter methods. Generate, getter. So these two are the new properties: article expiry, type date, and article is expired. I'm creating getter method for only article is expired because I don't want to use this property in HTML code because this article expiry, or else let me create getter for both. I would like to use both. Yeah, save the changes. This is the simple Sling model. Simple Sling model to read the data from the content node and process that content node data and generate the final output. Now let's deploy the code. Let's deploy the code by using our regular command mvn clean install -p install pandit. Yeah, deployment is completed. You can cross verify whether the class is registered as a Sling model or not in your system console. Yes, I have written a code. Deploy that code into AEM server and go to the OSA bundles and expand use portal core and scroll down. So these are the OSA component, required capabilities, and we'll see Sling model section. Yes. So here is the one. In the manifest headers, in the manifest header, and check the end of the values, Sling model classes is a separate section is available. Here you will find out all available Sling models of your jar file. com.bhaskar.newsportal.core.models.article details. Yes, the code is deployed. Code is deployed. And there is one more place to identify. Go to Sling and click on adaptables. Click on adaptables. Yeah, adapters. Click on Sling adapters and Control F, article details model. Article detail model. Yes, the class is available here. That means this class is registered successfully as a Sling model. The class is registered as a Sling model. com.bhaskar.newsportal.core.models.article detail model. So once the deployment is completed, you have to create object for this class in your HTML file by using data-sl-use. Otherwise, this class will not execute. Go to CRXDE and go to your components. Component. So here, create object for article detail model. SLY data-sly-use dot article model. So here object name, it could be any value equaled complete path. Complete path. Save the changes. Save the changes. Article detail model. Article detail model. We have successfully created object for a Sling model. Once you have the object, so here object name is article model, you can access all the instance variables of this class. So this is the fundamentals of Java. Once you have the object, by using this object, we can call all the instance variables of this class. Copy this object name. I'm removing this additional data. So here, instead of the properties, use your own object, article model, article title, article description, and article image. Save the changes and remove this entire part. Save the changes. So we have created object, and by using the object, we are calling all the instance variables of this class. Article title, article description, and article image are the instance variables. Instance variables. Save the changes. But here we have to write the condition article model dot article is expired. Where is it? Article is expired is property. If this property is false, then only this logic should execute. False means make it true. If this value is false, article is expired false, then only this logic should execute. If article expiry is true, print one statement. H1. This article is expired. Save the changes. Article is expired true. If it written true, we have to print this value. We have to print this statement. False means this statement should execute. That's why I'm using not false. Not false, then only to enter here. Save the changes. Now execute article detail component. Article detail component is part of the page. If we access the page, internally component will execute. If the component is execute, so this HTML file will execute. So here we are creating object for article detail model. It creates an object and then we are reading all the data. Let's access article 1. See, the component is available, but it is not returning any value. And open the dialog, see the data also available, but still the content is not rendering. There may be an issue with your HTML code or Sling model. Go to developer mode for debugging purpose and click on these errors. Yes, there is an error in article detail. Expand it. Copy this entire error. Paste into Notepad for readability. And scroll up, check the error. Sightly exception. Identifier com.bhaskar.newspaper4.article model can't be correctly instantiated by the use API. Means object creation is failed. Can't be correctly instantiated by use API means object creation is failed. When you try to create object for this article detail model by using HTML, by using data use statement, object creation is failing. Scroll down, check for the caused by statement. Missing element exception. Could not inject all required fields into class. Article detail model. This is also one more error. Missing element exception. Could not inject all required fields into article detail model. And if you scroll down little bit and we'll see the exact error. So here article expiry also a mandatory property. This property is not available in the content node. This property is not available in the content node. If there is a mandatory property, if that property is not available in the content node, then it will return error and it fails the object creation also. It fails the object creation also. Example. So here, in this model, we are trying to read article title and article description. So these properties are mandatory properties. By default, all these properties are mandatory properties. These properties should be available in this content node. In this content node, these properties should be available. If these properties are not available in the content node, and then trying to create object by using data and use, object creation will fail. Object creation will fail if mandatory properties are not available in the content node. If mandatory properties are not available in the content node. In your Sling model, by default, all fields are mandatory fields only. All fields are mandatory fields only. Article title is mandatory, article description is mandatory, article image is mandatory, article expiry also mandatory in our case. See, we are reading all the properties. Article title, article description, and article image and article expiry. So these four properties we are reading. These four properties we are reading. In your content node, these four properties should be available. If any one of the properties missing in the content node, object creation will fail. Object creation will fail and your HTML code will throw an error. Even the entire component will disappear. Because by default, all these injector specific variables are mandatory variables. Let me debug it whether we have article expiry in the article 1 page or not. Go to article 1 page and go to the content node of article detail. Go to the content node of article detail. Check here, I have article description, article image, article labels, article title, but we don't have article expiry property. Article expiry property is not available, but article expiry property is a mandatory property in the Sling model. So that's why here object creation is failed. Object creation is failed. This debugging is very important. We should be able to debug yourself. Caused by statement, and below you will see the exact error. Suppressed. This property is mandatory, but this property is not available in the content node. Let me add this property directly without the dialog. Of course, if you have the dialog field, we can add it. Article expiry. Type is date. And value is, let me select tomorrow's date as expiry date. And click on add. Save the changes. Now article expiry property is available. Now when I access article 1 page, this entire content node will execute one by one, including article detail. And based on the Sling resource property of this content node, the request will go to article detail component and execute article detail.html file. So here we are trying to create object. While creating object, we have the multiple annotations inside this article detail model. Those annotations will execute, and those annotations will read the data from article detail content node. So here we have all the properties now. Let me refresh. This article is expired. This article, what is the date? Article expiry 10. I think our logic is wrong. Our logic is wrong. Let me give a expired one.
You have kept greater than 0.
Yeah, correct. You have to use less than, correct. Yeah, now it is printing. So here there is a logical issue. Instead of greater than, here we have to use less than. Less than. Article expiry is less than today's date. Less than today's date, then we have to consider article is expired. Now print the data. So before deploying the code, so as we discussed, by default, all these injectors are mandatory. But we can make it optional also. Default is mandatory. Let's say if you don't mention any optional or required annotations or injection strategies, by default, all these properties are mandatory properties. But we can make it optional. We can make it optional by using injection strategy. Injection strategy. Injection strategy is one of the attribute in value map value. Value map value. Injection strategy equal to optional. In this case, even though this property is not available in the content node, it won't return error. Now article title is optional. Article title is optional. Let me add same property for all properties. You can make it optional. Now all fields are optional. All fields are optional. When you try to create object, if these fields are not available, it won't return any error. It will simply create object with null values. So this is one approach. We can make it, these variables are optional by using injection strategy. But we're adding optional for each and every annotation, right? This is not right implementation in this case, because we are adding optional for each and every property. So let me revert the changes. So instead of adding each and every property, we can define at class level. We can define at class level injection strategy required, optional. Optional. If you define at class level, all these properties are optional properties now. All these properties are optional properties in this content node. So this optional we can define either class level or property level. Either class level or property level. Now I have defined optional class level. So that's where all these properties are optional properties. Even though these properties are not available in the content node, we can create object for article detail model. We can create object for article detail model. But we can override this class level optional into required by adding property level. Injection strategy equal required. Now article title is required one. Now article title is required one. Even though you have defined optional, all fields are optional at class level, we can override at property level by using injection strategy in added value map value. So there is many ways to define a property as optional or required. So one way is by using injection strategy, either class level or property level. or else we can use required, required annotation, or else we can use optional annotation. Optional annotation to make these properties optional, but we should not use both at a time. Use either one, either required or optional. But these two are old annotations. These two are old annotations. Either we can use required or optional, or you can use injection strategy. But injection strategy is recommended because injection strategy is part of value map value. Rather than using one more annotation and executing one more class, we can directly use injection strategy in value map value. So this is the recommended one. Okay, so let me read sling colon resource type property. Sling colon resource type property value map value, private string, property name is sling colon resource type property. So this is one of the property in the content node, sling colon resource type. So as we discussed, the content node property should match with the Java variables. Yes, I'm using same variable names. Same variable names, article title, article description, article image, and article expiry. But in this case, I can't use the same name. This is a valid node property, but this is not a valid Java variable. This is not a Java variable. So we can't use exact node property name as a Java variable in this case. So here mapping is required. Mapping is required between content node properties and Java variables by using name. By using name. In the name, mention the content node property name. Sling colon resource type is the property name. So here you can use any variable name. So here variable name is not important now because name is an attribute. It will be useful to map node property with Java variable. Node property with the Java variable. Let's say if you are working older version of AEM, we can use @named annotation. @named annotation for mapping purpose. But this is the old annotation, not recommended to use. Not recommended to use. Just for it may be useful for your interview. That's why I'm covering named as well. But named and optional and required are the old annotations. If you are working 6.3 or older version, it may be useful to you. So here name is an attribute or name is an annotation. It will be useful to map the content node properties with Java variables. There is one more annotation called @default. 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 So this annotation will be useful to assign default values. Let's say this property is not available in the content node. If this property is not available in the content node, @value map value, inject the default value null. Null is the default value if that property is not available in the content node. Let's say article title. Let's say if you don't configure article title, this @value map value return null value. It will inject null value. Of course, null is the default value for the string. Null is the default value string. It will return null value. But instead of returning null value, if you want to return default value, this default will execute if that property is not available in the content node. If the property is available in the content node, we'll simply read the data and assign to the Java variable. If not available, then @default annotation will execute. @default annotation will execute, and it will assign this default value to this variable. @default also one more variable, one more annotation. So far we discussed about the multiple annotations. @model is one annotation. @modal is one annotation, and @post construct is one more important annotation, and @default also important one. And we have used multiple outdated like named annotation or optional annotation and required annotation. So these are outdated annotation. So these three annotations we have discussed, and @value map value. So @value map value is injector annotation. Because it will inject the data into the Java variables. It will inject the data into the Java variables. @value map value is one injector. It will inject the data into the Java variables by reading from the content node. It will be useful to read data from content node and assign to Java variables. Similarly, we have 8 injectors. @value map value is one injector, and @yj service is one more injector. @yj service is one more injector, and @sling object, @script variable, and child resource. These 5 injectors are important. @value map value, it will be useful to read the data from the content node and assign to the Java variables. And YJ services, sling object, and script variable and child resource we'll discuss later. And there are 3 more annotation. @self is one annotation, and request attribute is one annotation, and self request attribute and resource path is one more annotation. So these 3 annotations are not important. Total 8 injectors annotations are available. Out of 8, these 5 are important. Value by value, YJ service, link object, script variable, and child resources. So before discussing about this annotation, injector specific annotation, let's discuss about one more annotation called @exporter. @exporter. See, this exporter will not be useful for normal implementation. Let's say you are working on headful implementation. Headful means content creation and rendering, both are done by the AEM servers. In the headful implementation, these exporters are not required. But if you are using either headless or hybrid approach, we already discussed about these 3 approaches in the content fragments: headful and headless and hybrid. Headful means both author and publish servers can use for content creation, content rendering. And the headless, we can use this AEM only for content creation. Means either we can use author or publish, but content rendering is done by some third-party services. Hybrid means it will be useful for both headful and headless. Either way, you can use it as headful or headless. So these are 3 different approaches. But these exporters are mainly used for headless, to export the data in the form of JSON. Let's convert this object into JSON object by using @exporter annotation. But in normal cases, it won't be useful. Maybe it will be useful for your interviews or headless implementation or hybrid implementation. Exporter is an annotation. In the exporter annotation, 2 attributes are required. One is name annotation, and second one is extension annotation. Sorry, attributes, not annotation, attributes. Name attribute and extensions attribute. And name is an attribute, value is JSON. JSON is one of the JSON library. It will be useful to convert Java object into JSON object. There is multiple libraries are available. JSON is one library. JSON is one library. So either we can use JSON or JSON, but JSON is one of the famous library to convert the Java object into JSONs. Let's use JSON. JSON. And extension is JSON because we have to export the data in JSON format. So these two attributes are required, name attribute and extension attribute, but not recommended to hard code these values. Instead of using these hard coded values, use exporter constant. Exporter constants dot where is the name? Yeah, exporter name JSON. And remove this hard coded value. Use exporter constant dot model extension JSON. So don't use hard coded value. Use these constant values. But check this value. The values are same. JSON is the value. But instead of using this hard coded string, we can use these constant values. And extension is JSON. JSON is an extension. And one more attribute is required in @ model, that is resource type. A resource type is one more attribute is required. Resource type. Resource type is nothing but your component path, news portal, components, article hyphen details. Save the changes. Save the changes. So this attribute is required when you are exporting data in JSON format. These two configurations are required in order to export data in JSON format. Data in JSON format. Resource type and exporter. Now I think our class is almost ready. Let's deploy this code. Wait for the deployment. Its deployment is success. For the testing purpose, go to CRSTE. Copy this content node path. Copy this content node path. And then localhost 4502. And paste that content node path dot model dot JSON. Dot model dot JSON. See, I'm accessing article 1 page and then content node path dot model. Model is a selector. This is one of the predefined selector to export the data in JSON format. So especially we use for page export or component export. Dot JSON. Click on enter. See, it will convert the entire component data into component object into JSON file. Article title, article description, article image, or article expiry is a number. Is article expired true? Because we have selected old value. Old value, that's why it's returning true. After processing the data, after comparing date with the today's date, now this property value is updated. True. We can export this entire page by using same selector. Article 1 model.json. So the entire component will be included in this model.json. Article -1 dot model.json. The entire page also we can export in the form of the JSON. So this JSON format especially required for headless implementation or hybrid implementations. Again, this will be useful for your interview. @exporter is annotation. @exporter is annotation. So let's move to injector specific annotation. So far we discussed about @value map value only. Next injector is @Voyager services. @Voyager services. It will be useful to inject Voyager service into Sling model. To inject OSGI service into Sling models. Let's say I have article service is one of the Voyager service. If you want to use that article service into Sling model, so we have to use this annotation. It is similar to @reference annotation. If you remember, @reference is annotation. It will be useful to inject one Voyager services into another Voyager service or component. Another Voyager component or service. @reference, but @reference is Voyager annotation. We can use only in Voyager component and services. But we are working on Sling model. In the Sling model, we can't use @reference annotation. So that's why the Sling introduced one more annotation called @Voyager service. @Voyager service. It is similar to @reference annotation, but both are different APIs. @reference is Voyager annotation. It will be useful only in Voyager component and services. @Voyager service is a Sling annotation. It will be useful only in Sling models, but both do the same thing. It will inject the Voyager services into Voyager services or component or Sling models. But based on the place, we have to use either @reference annotation or @Voyager service annotation. If you are working on Sling model, and if you try to inject Voyager services into Sling model, use @Voyager service. If you are working on Voyager services, and if you try to inject another Voyager services into the current Voyager service, then use @reference annotation. But internally, both do the same thing. It will inject the Voyager services. Let me inject here. @Voyager service. Article service. Article service. So without this Voyager services, article service value is null. Because we are declaring the variable, we did not assign the value. We did not assign the value. The value of this article service is null. But if you use @Voyager service, in the runtime, it will identify the existing object of this article service and assign to this variable. In the runtime, the value will assign to this variable. So that is done by the Voyager service annotation. Once you have the object, we can call the methods of this article service. In the post construct method, if required, article service dot get article method, we can call it. But here it is not required. Let's say if it is required, the Voyager services in the Sling model. So this is how we can inject. This is how we can inject and then call the instance methods of article services. This is an example. And Sling object and script variable. Sling object and script variable. So these two annotation will be useful to inject HTL global objects into Sling model. HTL global object into Sling model. So we have around 28 global objects are available. All 28 global objects we can inject into Sling model by using @Sling object and script variable. So we can divide this HTL global objects into two parts. One is Sling object and second one is non-Sling objects. This HTL global object we can divide into two parts or two categories. Two categories. Two categories. One is Sling object and non-Sling object. Sling object we can inject by using @Sling object annotation. Non-Sling object we can inject by using @script variable annotation. Let me find out all the HTL global objects. So these are the global objects. Total 28 global objects are available. Total 28 global objects are available. So this global object we can divide into two parts, sling object and non-sling objects. Sling object and non-sling object. So out of 28, these 5 are the sling objects. A request object and resolver object and resource object and response object and sling object. So these are the object name and these are the classes. Sling HTTP servlet request is the class and object name is the request. Resource resolver is the class and object name is the resolver. And resource is the class and resource object name also same. And response. These 5 objects, these 5 HTTP global objects are sling objects. The remaining objects are non-sling objects. Non-sling object. But two important points we have to remember while injecting HTTP global objects. While injecting HTTP global object. Number one, we have to use the same object name. Let's say I need resource resolver. Let's say I have a resource resolver. This is one of the HTTP global object. If you want to use this resource resolver in your Sling model, you have to use the same variable name. So this is the first and most important point. Scroll up at the rate Sling object annotation and resource resolver and variable name should match with global object name. See here. Sling object is annotation. It will be useful to inject HCL sling object, HCL global objects, global sling objects. Resource resolver and object name is a resolver. If you give a different name here, at the time of the injector, it will try to identify with that name. That won't be available because these are the predefined objects. The objects already created with these names. We are trying to inject existing objects, existing HCL global object in our Sling model by using a direct Sling object and script variable annotation. So these 5 objects we can inject by using script Sling object, and remaining object we can inject by using script variable annotation. But all are HTL global objects only. HTL global objects only. Global objects the default object, and these would be available for every Sling model and HTL components. So this is the first point. The variable name should match with the global object names. Second point, so here in adaptable section, we should use Sling HTTP servlet request. We should use Sling HTTP servlet request dot class. So these two are very important points. If you forget to mention Sling HTTP servlet request dot class, injection will fail. Or else if you give a different name, in that case also injection will fail. We have to use the same name. And in the adaptable section, we have to use Sling HTTP servlet request dot class. So these 2 points are very important while injecting data into Sling models. And next one is at the rate child resource annotation. At the rate child resource annotation. At the rate child resource annotation. So this at the rate child resource annotation will be useful to read composite multi-field data. It will be useful to read composite multi-field data. If you remember, this composite multi-field data will store in the form of the child resource. Under the content node, it will store as a child resource. I think in my local I don't have. Okay, let me create manually. But in your local, try to create the content by using the dialog. I think by mistake I have deleted the dialog from article detail. Related articles. Related articles. Inside the related articles, item 0. Property name, page title. Say the changes. So here article detail is a content node and it is pointing to article detail component. Inside this component, I have related article. This is one composite multi-field. We already discussed at the time of the dialog. When you configure the data through the dialog, that composite multi-field data will store in the form of child node. The related article is a child node of article detail. So these child nodes we can read by using @child resource annotation. By using @child resource annotations. A related article is the child node of this article detail. So this child node I can read by using @child resource annotation. @child resource. It will return list of resource objects. The name should match with the child node name. So in this statement, related articles is the child node of article detail content node. A related article, the child node name should match with the variable name. But inside the child, again, we have the multiple nodes. Item 0 and item 1, item 2, item 3, there will be multiple nodes. Each node will convert into resource object. Item 0 will convert into resource object. And item 1 also convert into resource object. So these two resources object will be added into list object. So this statement will return list of resources. This statement will return list of resources. List of resources. Either we can use resource or we can use our own object. Resource is one of the Sling API. It will be useful to represent one node in JSR repository. Either we can use resource or else we can use our own Sling model. Let me create our own Sling model. Instead of using resource, we'll use our own Sling model. A related article item model. And here @model annotation and adaptable SQL resource.class. And in the content node, we have two properties. Use these two properties in the Sling model, page path and page title. Two properties are available in the content node. And I'm added those two properties as a value map value and annotation properties and generate the getter methods. So these Sling model classes are adaptable Java classes. Sling model classes are adaptable Java classes. We can convert a node into Java object. A node into Java object. While converting, the properties of this node will convert into Java variables and values. Page path and page title, the two different properties of item 0. While converting this node into related article item model. So this property value should match with the Java variables, and these values will store into the Java variable. Now go back to article detail model. Remove resource. Use related article model item. Save the changes. Save the changes. At the rate child resource is annotation. It will be useful to read the child node of our content node. Related articles is the child node of article detail content node. It will return list of object because under related articles again we have the child. Each child node will convert into one object. The object may be either resource or custom Sling model. In our case, we are using custom Sling model. So first item 0 will convert into our custom Sling model. So our custom Sling model is related article item model. So it will read page title and page path. And again, while processing item 0, it will convert into related article item model. This is the second object. These two objects will be added into the list, and then it will return list of related article item model objects. So this list we can read in HTML by using data-sli-list. Data-sli-list is a block statement. It will be useful to read or iterate list of objects. Example, array of strings or any collection object. So here list also a collection object. List also a collection object. We can read by using HTML. And there are three more, but these three are not important. At the rate self will be useful to convert one. At the rate self is annotation. It will be useful to inject one Sling model into another Sling model. Another Sling model. At the rate self is annotation. It will be useful to it will be useful to inject one Sling model into another Sling model. A resource path. A resource path is annotation. It will be useful to create resource object based on the path.
Chama, will you attach this PPT also?
Yeah, it is already available in the drive.
But these all are not available in the PPT.
Let me quickly check. Sling. Okay, I think this is the old one. Okay, I'll update it.
Yeah.
I'll
For
update.
remaining also some once cross check everything.
Okay. I will update the one. Okay. Okay, so if you know the content node path, this is the content node path in my JCR repository. And if you want to create a resource object, resource is one of the Sling API. Sling API, we can create resource object for the content nodes in JCR repository. So this is a node in JCR repository, and this is the path. Based on the path, if you want to create resource object, we can use resource path. But this is not important one. Without this annotation also, we can create resource object. In the API session, I will cover how to create a resource object. But this is one of the way to create a resource object. Next one is request attribute. While creating object for any class, we can pass additional data by using at the rate type equal, for example, sports. So this additional data we can read in HTL by using request attribute. See, this is the statement for object creation. At the time of object creation in HTL, we can pass the additional data by using at the rate symbol, at the rate type equals sports. This additional data we can read in HTL by using at the request attribute. So this is one more injector specific annotation. These 8 are the injectors. Out of these 8, first 5 are very important. Even for your interviews also, first 5 are important. But we have few more old annotation. It may be useful for your interviews. Please be available 5 to 10 minutes. We'll close it. At the rate inject is one old annotation. It will be useful for your interview, but nobody using at the rate inject now. But if you are working on old project like 6.2 or 6.3 old project, they are still using at the rate inject annotation. So this is one generic annotation. To inject all type of data. Example, content node data, content node properties, and OSGI services, and global objects. So any kind of data we can inject by using inject annotation. Then what is the use of value map value OSGI service? Why these many annotations are required? If you are able to inject all the data by using inject, then what is the use of value map value? Yes, there is a use. Let's say if we use inject to read article title, or to inject OSGI service. Or to inject HTL global objects, or inject to HTL global objects. HTL global object. We can use the same annotation. But so far we have discussed different injectors to inject different kind of data. At the rate value map value is one injector to inject content node data. OSGI services, it will be useful to inject OSGI services. Sling object script variable to inject HTL global objects. And child resource to inject child content nodes. There is multiple injectors are available to inject different kind of data. But this is one generic injector to inject all kind of data into Sling models. But there is a performance issue. If we use injector, first it will try to identify the best suitable injector. It will try to identify the best suitable injector. So these are the injectors are available in a Sling. Injector and injector specific annotations. Script binding, value map, resource path, child resource, request attribute, OSGI services, self, and Sling object. So these are the different injectors. And here is the injector specific annotation. If you use value map value, internally this injector will execute to inject the data by reading from the content node. If you use injector, this is one generic injector. The first step, it will identify best suitable injector to inject the data. Out of these 8, it will identify the best suitable injector to inject the data into the variable and execute that injector. 2 steps. One is identifying the best suitable injector and executing the injector. But if you use @value map value, directly it will execute value map injector. Without searching, directly it will execute value map injector. But here it will identify the best suitable injector out of this 8 and execute that injector. Execute the 2 steps are required. One is to identify the injector and execute the injector. So this process is same for all statements. So here also same. While executing this statement, it will identify the best suitable injector from this table. Yes, wages services is the one. Based on the type of this class, it will identify the best suitable injector and execute it. So that's why not recommended to use this @injector, because every time it will try to identify the best suitable injector and execute it. But we can avoid that step by using @source annotation. By using @source annotation, we can avoid that step. For example, source equal to value map. Value map is injector name. We'll find it in this table. Injector name. So in this case, directly it will execute value map. Directly it will execute value map. It won't try to identify the best suitable injector. Directly execute the value map, because we have defined the source. @source is the annotation. It will be useful to map the injector to the inject annotation, but still not recommended because 2 annotations need to execute. To compare with @value map value, this approach is not recommended. This is old approach. Still, some people are using 6.2 and 6.3 versions. But it will be useful for your interview. What is the difference between @inject and @value map value? And what is the use of @source? So this annotation may be useful for your interview. I think only one annotations are pending. Model named optional exporter default inject. Except this via, I think we have discussed everything. Okay, the last annotation is @via. @via annotation. @via annotation. But this annotation also old annotation. @value map value. Okay. Let's say in this statement, it will read the data from the content node. Here the content node is a resource. From the resource, it will read the property. Read the property. For @value map value, default source is content node, or also called resource. But we can change this default source by adding via annotation. @via, @via, let's say we use request. Now it will read the data from the request object. Instead of reading from the resource, or also called content node, it will read from the request object. But this is the old annotation. If you want to use via, no need to use @via annotation. Via is attribute now. Via is attribute in @value map value. We can use via attribute. Then we can define the source. Now, while reading the data, it will read the data from the request object. It will try to read the data from the request object. @value map value, via equal request. Via equal request. So it will read data from article title data from request object. So via is old annotation. Either you can use via or via attribute. So this is the Sling model annotations. Let me know if you have any questions in Sling model annotations.